All right, welcome to Path of the Jedi, the podcast where Star Wars meets personal development. My name is Ronnie Cruz, your host for this mixed nuts adventure. Trail mix. No, mixed nuts for sure. I chose this phrase this week because there is definitely a mixed bag of emotions happening since last week's episode. Primarily, okay, so first, I'm definitely very excited to be here, very excited to be recording another episode for you. We just had our biggest week yet in history, in Path of the Jedi history. We had the most downloads this past week that we've ever had before in a single week. We also just, as of Monday, July 4th, hit the 4,000 total downloads milestone, which is big, right? It's really huge. That's an amazing accomplishment. And the first episode on Kenobi that we did back in June, hit over 100. I think as of today, it's at 132 downloads, which is huge because I don't have this show doesn't have anything over 100 downloads since like back in the single digit episodes, right? The other ones are working their way up towards 100, but the Kenobi episode, which I think is episode 36 of Path of the Jedi, it hit 132 very recently and still climbing. So yeah, I'm super excited about that. That's never happened before, where a new fresh episode has hit the over 100 mark. So hopefully it's a sign of things to come. Hopefully it's an indication that we're reaching a tipping point, a critical mass, as it were. Either way, I'm going to continue to do this until we hit that, and get this message, get this podcast and show out to more and more people. So, I want to first of all, thank all of you for continuing to listen and support to Path of the Jedi. I love doing this. This is an absolute passion of mine. It's grown. I've grown to really love this more and more. I mean, I loved it since inception, but I'm really falling in love with this process and delivering you guys this content because it allows me to enjoy Star Wars, first of all, at a different level, and it allows me to share my insights with you, share the things that I've learned over the years through my own personal development journey and my growth journey through the lens of the Star Wars, and that's incredibly fun. That's incredibly fun and fulfilling, and again, given the numbers and the increase in viewership and listenership, it sounds like you guys like what I'm doing here. So again, I thank you guys so much for allowing me the honor to be in your ear space and head space every week. That said, I gotta admit that I've been a little out of sorts lately. Well, more than just a little. Given all the craziness that's been happening here in the United States, and this podcast certainly isn't all about current events and bad news and things like that. But I wanted to share this with you guys, or at least share how I'm feeling with you guys, because I know I can't be the only one, right? I can't be the only one. In case you hadn't heard, again, I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but to put everything in context, there was another mass shooting here in the U.S. That happened on July 4th in the Chicago area during a 4th of July parade. And, I don't want to make this about me. Certainly it's not, right? Like it's about the people that have been affected, the individuals, the families that have been affected by this senseless act of violence. However, that doesn't exclude the rest of us from having emotions and a reaction to this thing, right? For me, it just like I am so confused by I'm so confused that we of the atrocities that we as a human family continue to inflict on ourselves. It's crazy. I mean, it doesn't baffle me because I get it. I understand human psychology and why people are driven to do what they're driven to do, but I guess I'm more confused at that it continues to happen, and that things continue to escalate and elevate to this level where, yeah, I mean, just again, senseless acts of violence against innocent people. Um, yeah. Again, I don't mean for this show to be like this. Um, and we're certainly going to talk about this more thematically in today's episode. But I just wanted to bring focus to that because, again, I am, I'm off balance, right? I'm off balance. I want to continue to work to be happy and enjoy my life and do what I do. But also have to recognize that there are some things in the world that's happening that's completely out of my control and seems to continue to spiral even worse and worse, right? To spiral further out of control. Um, Again, we're gonna kind of tackle a little bit of this in today's episode, but for now, I'd like to ask all of you to just take a moment and reflect on the individuals, the families, the people that have been affected by this tragedy. Let's send them as much force and healing and love and light as we can. And so, if you would do me a favor, let's just take a brief moment of silence for everybody that was affected by the shooting. Okay, well, thank you all for allowing me that, indulging me in that brief moment of silence. I really, really appreciate it. Okay, so if you guys haven't noticed yet, I am recording mobily. Well, it's not the usual show yet. It's not the usual same format with the intro and the music and all the bells and whistles. I am recording mobily again, which I really love. I love being able to sit out here on my porch and stare at the mountain range and this amazing view and listen to nature in the background and, well, the occasional car that drives through the mountain pass, which also motorcycles. We get a lot of motorcycles out here because of these windy mountain roads, especially this time of year when it's nice and warm. So yeah, I mean, it is, again, like I live a pretty charmed life, and I'm privileged to be able to do this from my home on a porch on a phone, which is crazy. I think future episodes are definitely going to be recorded on the phone. But here's some other news. My computer is fixed. My computer is fixed. I just have to go into town and pick it up tomorrow. So I'll be able to access all that other data, the other files like the intro music and the outro music and all that stuff. So future episodes will have that stuff, but I will switch my recording operations to something more mobile, right? Something more mobile. So again, if you hear background noises or if it's a different quality than past episodes, again, without the bells and whistles, understand that I am recording mobily and we're still kind of adjusting to this new situation. So appreciate you guys' patience. We'll still bring you great content nonetheless. Okay, so diving into the meat and potatoes of this episode, we will be tackling Obi Wan Kenobi Part 2, right? Part 2. I know it's like July, and we're just now covering Part 2, which was released the same day as Part 1. So, yeah, I'm feeling way more behind than I actually am. Well, in terms of the conversation, right? You guys have probably been talking about this stuff for the last month or so. But yeah, well, it is just how it is. I like to wait, and I like to save the conversation to spare anybody who might still be catching up any spoilers. So if you're not caught up yet, if you haven't dove into Obi-Wan Kenobi, go ahead and binge. Turn this podcast off. Binge at least to episode 2 or part 2 of Kenobi, and then come back and listen to the show. Because I don't know. I'm the kind of individual that hates spoilers, so I do everything I can to avoid being spoiled, so that I can watch and experience the material fresh without any expectations, right? And that's just how I operate. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. Part 2. Lots happened, and what's cool, just with the show, I mean, there's so much depth, even with just the first 2 parts, right? The first 2 episodes. There's so many layers to this thing. Okay, so obviously there's plot, right? Like a lot of us have been waiting for plot. What has happened to Obi-Wan during during this period of his life. What has happened, that connects Leia to the Leia that we meet in Episode 4, right? Like all the plot situations and the things that bridge that gap between Episode 3 and Episode 4. Which is awesome, right? Which is awesome. Plot is great, and they've done a masterful job with this show thus far with Obi Wan Kenobi, parts 1 and 2. They've done a masterful job in weaving those things, and I expect that in the coming episodes that I'll be talking about here, in the coming weeks. Yeah, I think a lot of plot stuff is just going to be beautifully told. On top of that, there's so many deep layers thematically and with the character journeys, right? Obi-Wan obviously is going through a tremendous journey of transition, of letting go of the past and becoming the Obi-Wan that we meet. That we meet by Rebels when we see Obi-Wan in Rebels, and then of course Episode 4, A New Hope. There's his journey. There's Leia's journey. We get more color and text, subtext, and information on Leia's path and the things that have happened to her on her journey that has led to why she is the way she is. And then of course we introduced to the Inquisitors, right, and their own journeys. And then of course I think everybody knows at this point that Darth Vader comes back, right? Like, I think we all knew that Hayden was coming back to reprise his role as Darth Vader even before the show was released. So there's all these deep, beautiful layers to explore, and that gives us podcasters so much to talk about. For today's episode, part 2. Again, there's a lot of dynamic that can be explored between for lack of a better word, the bureaucracy of the Inquisitors, and with Reva and that dynamic of her wanting to excel and achieve the thing that she wants to achieve, but then being reminded, quote unquote, of her place and her station. Like, that's an entire episode on its own. Which I'm going to have to come back to, because there's some other stuff that really, that are really pertinent, especially given that Leia is the focal point right now. In this particular episode of Obi-Wan, it focuses on rescuing Leia, and we get so much backstory about her and information about who she is and why she is the way she is in this particular episode. And so I really want to dive into that, because again, it's important not only from the context of Leia as a whole and getting to know her as a whole, and all that richness in her character, but I think as an example, Leia can serve for all of us in modern context, in earthly context, right? And what we're all having to deal with in this modern day and age. Okay, so I wanted to start with the scene where Obi-Wan and Leia are in an alley. And Obi-Wan tells Leia that he's contacted her parents, and that very soon, she'll be back with them and everything will be back to normal. Leia's response really, really stood out to me, because it was like, normal, great, right? As if, well, number one, clearly she it wasn't or isn't very pleased or content with that version of normal. But also, too, I think there's an underlying context of things never being normal for Leia, right? It goes back to her being an orphan, right? Her being an adoptee. Whether or not that's well, I think it is for her, given when you look at her interactions and her conversations with the characters that she's interacted with thus far in these first 2 parts, you see that it's definitely on the forefront of her mind. Like, it's a big part of her identity that she's not a natural born Organa, right? And if it's not on the forefront of her mind, she's definitely constantly reminded by her snot-nosed cousin that she is in fact adopted, right? And so, I bring this up because as an adoptee, right? As an adoptee, and I don't know if other adoptees will agree with me or or feel the same way. But normal just doesn't exist, right? It doesn't exist. I've never really, and I can say, like, I had a pretty stable upbringing. My childhood was, for the most part, I don't know. I'm not going to get into that, but well, I'm definitely not a queen's daughter. I'm definitely not a senator's daughter, and I definitely haven't been kidnapped. So, compared to Leia, definitely more stable. Um, but regardless of that, right? Like, I think knowing that you're growing up as a different thing, or at least with the identity and label of being an orphan, it's automatically not like anybody else, right? Not like the majority of people that you grow up knowing and being around. And so that sense of normal, at least for me, really never existed. And I would wager to say that for Leia, it would be the same way. I mean, she has a very kind of restless spirit as a result, right? Because, like, there is no normal, right? Right? Normal sometimes can either be undesirable and boring at the very least, and at the very worst, completely non-existent, right? When I mean, just look at the last 2 years. Normal has changed drastically for kids growing up, right? With the pandemic and the lockdown and everything. And then when you tack on something like, when kids are exposed to traumatic events, children that experience war, like in Ukraine, right? Or children that experience natural disasters where they're completely dislodged from any sense of quote unquote normalcy, right? Like extreme things happen, and so the worldview changes at a very young age when you're aware that you're different from everybody else, and that at any given moment, what you know as what's happening currently can change, right? Like, can change at the turn of a hat, a turn of a dime. I can't remember what the saying was. And so I think for Leia, it's like seeing how she's reacted and how resilient she's been through this whole kidnapping. To me, is a sign that yeah, well, she's used to things not being normal. She's used to not having a normal. Let me put it that way. And so, I think for strong individuals like Leia, dealing with things that with change, especially drastic change, in a way can, in the way that she does, it can help build her resilience, right? And because she not that she expects things to go south every time, but she can deal with it if it does, right? Because she's let go of the fact that there really is no such thing as normal, right? And maybe I'm projecting, but that's how I see this character. Because again, she has a certain resilience, obviously from a New Hope. We see that she's super independent, she's super resilient, and she takes no BS from anybody, right? Like, she's willing to stand up to the Moffs, to Tarkin, to Vader, even before she knew who Vader was. And in that scene where she was first taken by the Empire, right? Like, she was not taking any lip from anybody. And so like, it's, again, that resilience, I think, comes from her amazing ability to, well, not ability, but her just being used to and accepting that life is change, right? Life is constant change, and really that's the only true normal, if that makes any sense, right? If that makes any sense. Like, sometimes that change can happen at a snail's pace and we don't notice it, but it's happening nonetheless. Other times change can happen very drastically, like with the pandemic or with the world event that we've been exposed to a lot very recently. And so yeah. I think that her saying normal, great, is very telling, because it's, other people's notion of normal. She's like, whatever, like, that's not even a thing for me. At least, again, that's what I'm projecting, for what for the meaning of what behind what she said there. And also to speak to her resilience, I want to bring up another quote. I think it happened in the same scene, but Obi-Wan was asking about her droid Lola, who was broken, right? Obi-Wan was like, "Well, what happened to that thing, right?" And Leia said, and then this is the exact quote. Leia said, "She was ripped apart." Wait, sorry. Here's the exact quote. "She was ripped to pieces by kidnappers. She'll be all right though. She's strong." And for me, it's hard not to think that maybe even unconsciously she's talking about herself, right? I think children do have that ability to project and speak of themselves metaphorically and figuratively, right? Again, even if she doesn't know that she's doing it, but I think, yeah, well, she's strong. Like Lola is a reflection of who Leia is, right? Yeah, these kidnappers took her and have tried to quote unquote break her, but she's strong, right? She'll be all right. She'll make it through. Um, and when we see Leia first in this episode, when Obi-Wan tries to rescue her, she's not just sitting there waiting to be rescued, right? Like she has a plan. She is going to save herself. She's not sitting there waiting to be saved. Like she's handling her stuff, right? So I think even at this young age, Leia would have been able to handle escaping with or without any help, right? It's good that Obi-Wan was there, but yeah, we see that she's pretty self-reliant and like she's pretty unfazed. Well, she seems at least largely unfazed by what's happening around her and to her. Right? Again, it's a sign and a display of amazing resilience. That is amazing. Like I think, it's I get so excited about talking about this because it just gives so much more again richness to the character, a character that we've known for so long. Right now we know her childhood and we have the information and the backstory of why Leia is the way she is. One of the most powerful characters in the entire franchise, in my opinion, and still one of my favorites, more so now than ever before. Now, do we all have to then be orphans and adoptees to have the same resilience that Leia has? No, absolutely not. I think though it's a matter of understanding that there are things that we can control and there are things that we cannot control, and knowing the difference between those two. Okay, so clearly there are things that we all know we can't control, right? The decisions that other people make, the things that other people do, even how other people think, right? Or groups of people. With Leia in particular, her circumstances. I mean, there are even certain circumstances in our lives that we can't control, and Leia, as the example. I mean, again, from the very beginning, there was things, and I think she may be even unconsciously aware of, that she could not control, right? There were circumstances of her life that she could not control, namely being adopted. And having that awareness is a foundational piece of the identity that brings everything else into context, right? It brings everything else into context. If I can't control these external things, then I have to be resilient in what I do, because that is again foundational to what my life, or at least what my view of life is like, right? And so the flip side of that is then the things that we can't control, and really there's only one thing, is ourselves, right? It's how we respond and react to things that are happening around us that we have no control over, right? Again, with Leia as the example, she had no control over being an adopted child. She had no control of, well, none of us have a choice as far as what families we're born into and the certain circumstances and lot in life that those families happen to be participating in or are part of, right? Leia happens to be part of a royal family, right? Like she had no control over that, just like none of us have control over how we were born or how we grew up. with being kidnapped. She had no control over that. There was circumstances outside that were just using her as a pawn, and actually she recognized that immediately. Well, not immediately, but she deduced that finally with Obi-Wan. She realizing when she saw the bounty was out for his head, she realized, well, you're the reason why I've been kidnapped, right? And she couldn't control any of that. There was all kinds of other inner workings and people involved and the Sith and the Inquisitors and Obi-Wan and everything that happened in the prequels, all of that was outside of her control that led to her being kidnapped. Did she get defeated by it? No, because again, the thing that she could control is how she responded, right? She could control her own actions. And you see that she just accepts it as not, well, not that it's not a big deal, but it's kind of like, well, this is how it is. She's not defeatist or fatalistic about it. She's just like, okay, well, this is just how things are right now. How am I going to respond? How am I going to deal with it? And for her, it's just, yeah, well, it's just every day it seems, right? Again, she's marching around this kind of sketchy city with Obi-Wan, and she's completely unfazed by it, right? Because I think she has that internal confidence and she has that security that she knows that whatever happens, she'll handle it, and she has thus far. I mean, she's gotten freaking kidnapped and she's away from her home planet, away from the family that she's known thus far. And we're surrounded by complete strangers. Even Obi-Wan is a complete stranger, and so she knows exactly what she's doing in terms of how to deal with him in order to best protect herself, right? Right. So Leia again is an amazing model of knowing the difference between what she can control and what she cannot control, and that really, I think, helps build and foster her resilience and why she is the way she is, especially by the time we see her, well, through her whole life, really. I mean, like, she's pretty strong character through and through from beginning to end. Okay, I don't know if you guys heard that. That's thunder. We got a storm front coming through. It's been pretty rainy these last couple of days. There's been a lot of on and off weather. It was really full on bright sunny just like 2 minutes ago, and now the thunder clouds are rolling in. Anyways, neither here nor there. You guys will probably hear that in the recording though. So some of these concepts that I'm talking about in terms of control, I learned from my mentor, Rod Hairston, and the folks over at the Growth U community. It's called actually the control model. And again, it's the things you cannot control, and then the things that you can control, and it distinguishes between the two. Now, what lies in between those two regions is actually things you can influence, right? Things you can influence. And I really love that because, again, outside of the self, really, that's the only thing that we can control. It's ourselves. It's how we respond, how we react, the stories and the narratives that we tell ourselves about the situations and the circumstances that we're experiencing, right? That's all within our control. Outside of that, again, mostly things we cannot control, but there are things that we can help influence, right? We can help influence. And again, Leia is a great example of that because, with things feeling like they're spiraling out of control in all our lives, right? Especially with Leia's, right? Like, she can easily just like give up and just throw in the towel with everything that's happened to her because things continually seem to just spiral out of control. But she doesn't. Again, she has the resilience and she knows what she can control, and that is her own response. Instead of trying to control the external circumstances, which can be very, very like frustrating, right? And I think we see a lot of that frustration in the world today, where there's so many just wacky things happening, and like, it makes zero sense to us. We can logically talk to somebody and tell them why that's wrong or why that's completely off base, and then be completely misunderstood, or like there's zero connection or understanding happening. And so that's why it feels like, oh, like I can't change, I can't affect any change, right? Which it's not entirely true. Sometimes it can feel that way, but again, take the example of Leia, right? Regardless of the lack of control that we might feel, there are things that we can influence, especially if we pull together as a collective, for the betterment of humanity, for crying out loud, right? And Leia was the same way. I mean, that's why she became what she became. That's why she aligned herself with the rebellion. She knew what she could control, and that was herself. And the primary step of response in a tumultuous time is understanding that, hey, I cannot be defeated by this. I will not allow myself to feel defeated by this, maybe for a brief moment, but I will carry on, and I will persevere, and I will move forward in working towards influencing a change for the better, right? For the betterment of everybody. And she was tireless with that, right? She was tireless with that. I think we're going to see that from, we're already seeing that from a very young age. And as she grows up, I'm guessing that she'll learn to really use, her own resilience to try to influence change in the galaxy for the better, right? And you might be saying, well, the Sith and the Empire were working to influence change in the galaxy. I think the difference between the Sith and the Jedi, or the Empire and Leia, is that the Sith and the Empire, as much as they claimed to talk about wanting to bring order to the galaxy, I think their aims were, much more self-serving, right? You see that in the individual characters and the individual interactions with the empirical officers and the individual Sith, whereas Leia and the rebels, especially as she became, the leader in her later years, you see that they're still working to affect change for the betterment of everyone as a whole in the galaxy, right? It's for the greater good of humanity. And so there are things that we can do, right? Like, it's easy, I think. Well, I'm not going to say it's easy. I think it's okay to feel that we like everything is out of control, and that we can't make any impact, but we totally can. Primarily, number one, we can make an impact and a difference within ourselves, like Leia, right? Understanding that that's the singular thing that we can control, and that no matter what happens around us, that we get to choose how we digest that emotionally and mentally, and therefore how we respond to that thing, right? And then we can then get to work to working towards influencing change for the better, if that makes sense, right? So there's things that we cannot control. There are things that we can control, which is ourselves, namely. And then in between, there are things that we can influence, and we should work to influence. Like I said, there's so many things that feel like they're spiraling out of control in our world today. But that should not mean that we should stop trying, right? We should stop trying. Let's fight for our ideals that involve making the world a better place for everybody, not just for an exclusive handful of a few people, right? Like let's make this change for the better, inclusive of as many people, well, of everyone, because we are all part of one human family, whether we know it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not. I think I said this earlier. What one of us does affects everybody. What I do, what you do, it affects us all. And that is the only thing that we can control. All right. Well, that is going to do it for today's episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. I had to actually, we're going to go ahead and cut it short because it's not short. This episode has gone quite long. I am finding myself less refined, perhaps less edited for sure, less chopped up, less manicured, maybe less succinct. I don't know. I'll leave that up to you guys. But I definitely feel I ramble a little longer on this mobily recording situation as opposed to being, on my laptop in the quote unquote controlled studio. However, I like it. Again, I'm going to stick with this format for now. It's a little bit more raw, maybe, but you're getting a more of a picture of me. You're getting more of a real me, an unedited me. So for better or for worse, that's what it's going to be right now. And also, I had to retreat indoors. That's another reason why I have to cut this episode, because the weather came in much more quickly than I thought it was going to be. I mean, maybe you heard the thunder off in the distance, but it blew in fast, and so the recording conditions outside are really impossible. So I've had to go ahead and retreat indoors. But it's as good a time as any to go ahead and finish up this episode. Lots more to discuss, guys. I mean, this topic of resilience, this topic of control, it's nuanced, right? It's very nuanced. And so if you guys have any reflections, if you guys have any thoughts, if you disagree with anything that I mentioned today, just let me know. It is always an open discussion here at Path of the Jedi. So you can reach out to me on Twitter or Facebook. It's POTJ podcast for both of those things. Or you can send an email to info@pathofthejedi.com. With the title of this episode in the subject heading, and I'm happy to discuss anything with you directly, or discuss anything you'd like me to discuss here on the show next week. So, and especially if you want to leave an MP3, I'd love to play that on the show as well. So again, it's at POTJ podcast for Twitter and Facebook, and the email is info@pathofthejedi.com. All right, well, we will close this episode out like we close out every episode of Path of the Jedi, and that is with the shout out. This week's shout out goes to you. That's right, my beautiful, dear listeners. This shout out goes to each and every one of you who happens to be hearing this today, and especially if you need to hear this, that you matter. Right? I've said this in the show today, is that we are all one big human family, and what one person does affects each and every one of us. And I know this because of the way I'm feeling about certain things, right? It's an indication that even though I may not necessarily be directly involved, that it does affect me, right? And so the actions of one person affects the entire family as a whole. And I know that with everything that you might be facing, like you're all dealing and trying to juggle your own crazy frenetic lives, and the situations that you have to deal with individually, and with the unique things that's happening in your circumstances. And then on top of that, to have to deal with and juggle all the things that's happening in the world that seem completely manic and out of control. I want to let you know that, number one, you're not alone, and number two, you're doing a fantastic job. It may not feel like it sometimes, and you may feel defeated, and you might feel beat up and weary and just tired, but you're doing a great job. You're doing a great job. There are people that recognize that out here. There are people that see it, and if in case you haven't been told yet, well, I know I see it. I see it in you. You matter. You are important to me. And I appreciate your continued listenership. But outside of that, right, you guys are amazing in the support that you give me on this show. You give me reason to continue. I am so grateful for you guys allowing me this platform to share my perspective and my voice, and I want to reflect that back to you and let you know that you're not alone, and that you are supported in this Path of Jedi community. I support you, even though I haven't met you. I may not have even connected with you on social, but understand that I am here for you no matter what, even if it's just a voice in your ear every week. So with that, I just want to give you guys a resounding thank you, and let you know that this week's shout out goes to you. Okay, that's going to do it. So, just a reminder, if you guys want to give a shout out to anybody at all, and please, I think the world could use it, and you know, a little bit of celebration, a little bit of recognition of all the people out there that you might personally know who's making a difference and who's trying to influence change for the better for all of us, right? Like, or it could just be somebody that you love and that you just want to celebrate, and that's awesome too, right? That's awesome too. Everybody deserves a little bit of the spotlight and a little bit of celebration. So if you have anybody that you'd like to shout out here on the show, again, please send it to info@pathofthejedi.com and your brief message, even your MP3 with shout out in the subject heading, and I'm happy to either read that here on the show or play your MP3. But again, I think I love giving people shout outs. I love celebrating each and every one of you, and I want to continue to give you guys the opportunity to celebrate each other. So send those shout outs over, and I'm happy to read them here on the show. Okay, that's really going to do it for today, guys. Thank you again for tuning in. We'll catch you again next week. And I know I'm dragging out this Kenobi show, but there's so much to talk about. So I may pick back up on Kenobi Part 2 next week. But we'll see. Either way, whatever it happens to be, whatever the conversation is next week, we will definitely have a fresh new episode for you next Wednesday. I was going to say same bat channel, same bat time, but that's a whole different universe. Well, you guys know what I mean. So we'll catch you in the next one. Until then, be well, be safe, and may the Force be with you.